For years, Saddam Hussein presented himself as a symbol of strength and order. But behind the propaganda, there was another reality playing out in public where women were punished. And the way Saddam carried out these public punishments remains one of the most disturbing chapters of his rule. When Saddam officially became president of Iraq on July 16, 1979, he was not stepping into power as a newcomer. For more than a decade before that moment, he had already been the real force behind the government. As vice president under Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, Saddam controlled the intelligence services, internal security, and much of the Ba'ath Party's inner workings. He personally oversaw surveillance networks, prison systems, and interrogation centers. By the time he took the presidential oath, the state already answered to him. Saddam believed fear worked best when it was public. He did not trust quiet punishment. He wanted people to see what happened when someone stepped out of line. This belief shaped every part of his rule. Arrests were often visible, confessions were forced and broadcast. Executions were known, even when they were not shown. The goal was not just to punish the accused, but to educate everyone watching. Women played a special role in this system. Iraqi society in the late 1970s was deeply shaped by family honor and social reputation. A woman's standing affected her parents, husband, children, and even distant relatives. Saddam understood this cultural reality very clearly. By harming women publicly, he could damage entire families at once. A single punishment could silence dozens of people without firing a bullet. Public punishment of women also carried a lasting social effect. When a woman was shamed or accused, the stigma followed her forever. Communities remembered. Neighbors whispered. Families withdrew. This made punishment permanent. Even after the state stepped away, Saddam did not need to arrest everyone. Society would finish the job for him. Just days after taking power, Saddam moved to eliminate any potential rivals inside the Ba'ath Party. On July 22, 1979, he convened an emergency party meeting that was filmed and later broadcast on state television. During the session, Saddam accused senior party members of plotting against him. Names were read aloud. One by one, officials were removed from the room. Many were arrested on the spot and later executed. While the public focus was on the men being accused, the punishment quickly spread beyond them. Families of the accused were immediately labeled as relatives of traitors. This label carried serious consequences. Wives lost government jobs without explanation. Daughters were expelled from universities mid-semester. Mothers were suddenly denied access to food ration cards, which were essential for survival in Iraq's state-controlled economy. These actions were not written into law. They were enforced through party orders and security directives. Local officials were instructed to treat these families as politically dangerous. Women were often summoned to the Ba'ath Party offices under the pretext of questioning. Once there, they were accused of benefiting from betrayal or failing to control their households. These accusations were sometimes made in front of co-workers, classmates, or neighbors, ensuring maximum humiliation. In cities like Baghdad and Tikrit, where many party officials lived, these confrontations became widely known. People learned quickly that association itself was dangerous. A woman did not need to commit any act to be punished. Her connection to a man accused by the regime was enough. This method served several purposes at once. It isolated the accused by cutting them off from family support. It warned others inside the party that loyalty was not optional. And it turned women into invisible reminders of what disobedience cost. The state did not need to explain these actions. Their meaning was understood immediately. By the end of 1980, Iraqis had learned a crucial lesson. Under Saddam Hussein, punishment was not individual, it was inherited. Soon, this system would expand nationwide when Iraq invaded Iran in September 1980. The war was presented to the public as a fight for survival. The government told Iraqis that the country was under constant threat and that any weakness could lead to collapse. This message allowed Saddam Hussein to demand total obedience. Loyalty was no longer political. It became a matter of life and death. Anyone who questioned the war, avoided military service, or seemed connected to Iran was treated as a danger to the entire nation. Women were pulled into this system very quickly. In border areas like Basra, Maysan, and Diyala, families often had relatives on both sides of the border because these regions had long been connected through trade and marriage. The government used this reality against them. Women with Iranian relatives, Persian names, or Shiite religious ties were suddenly viewed with suspicion. Security forces began making arrests in public places. The accusations were usually vague. Some women were accused of passing information. Others were accused of sympathy toward Iran. In many cases, the only crime was having a brother, cousin, or husband who had lived or worked across the border. Evidence was rarely shown. There were no public trials. Being taken away by security forces was enough to mark someone as guilty in the eyes of the community. As the war dragged on and casualties increased, desertion became a serious problem for the Iraqi army. Saddam responded by turning family punishment into official practice. Soldiers who fled the front lines were labeled traitors, and their families were held responsible. Women became the main targets because they were easier to reach and more visible within neighborhoods. Mothers, wives, and sisters of deserters were summoned to police stations and intelligence offices. Some were detained for days. Others were beaten or threatened in front of local officials and residents. These punishments were not hidden. They were carried out in places people could see, such as local security centers, municipal buildings, and even school courtyards that had been converted into temporary detention areas. The goal was clear. If one family suffered publicly, others would think twice before allowing a son or husband to flee the army. Human rights groups later documented these practices, confirming that women were used as leverage to enforce military obedience. Over time, Iraqis became used to seeing violence in everyday settings. Public arrests, beatings, and executions stopped shocking people. They became part of daily life. For women, this visibility was especially dangerous. Simply being seen by the wrong person at the wrong time could lead to punishment. By the mid-1980s, the government no longer treated public punishment as a last resort. It became a routine tool. The war allowed Saddam to test how far fear could be pushed. In 1988, as the war was coming to an end, Saddam launched one of the most destructive operations of his rule, known as the Anfal campaign. It targeted Kurdish populations in northern Iraq. The campaign was led by Ali Hassan al-Majid, a close relative of Saddam, who had full authority over military and security forces in the region. Between February and September 1988, entire villages were destroyed, tens of thousands of people were killed, and chemical weapons were used against civilians, most notably in Halabja in March 1988. While many killings happened in remote areas, the aftermath pushed Kurdish women directly into public punishment systems. After villages were emptied, thousands of women were transported to detention centers and then relocated to Arab-majority cities, such as Kirkuk, Mosul, and parts of Baghdad. These women arrived as prisoners, not refugees. They were treated as defeated enemies. Once relocated, Kurdish women were placed under constant surveillance. Security forces monitored where they lived, who they spoke to, and how they dressed. Speaking Kurdish in public could lead to punishment. Wearing traditional clothing could draw attention. Even asking about missing husbands or sons was seen as political defiance. Some women were detained publicly for refusing to accept relocation orders. Others were punished simply for trying to return to their home regions. Public degradation played an important role during this period. Kurdish women were often labeled as supporters of separatism, a charge that carried serious consequences. Being marked this way isolated them socially and justified continued harassment. Local populations were encouraged to see them as outsiders who deserved control and suspicion. These actions were not random cruelty. They were part of a larger goal. By breaking Kurdish families and humiliating women in public, the regime aimed to erase Kurdish identity and prevent further resistance. By the end of 1988, Saddam's government had fully absorbed a dangerous lesson. Public punishment could do more than silence individuals. It could reshape societies. Women, because of their social role and visibility, had become one of the most powerful tools in that strategy. And the story was far from over. When the Gulf War ended in February 1991, Iraq was left broken and humiliated. The army had been defeated, much of the country's infrastructure was destroyed, and the government appeared weak for the first time in years. In this moment of instability, long-suppressed anger exploded. In March 1991, uprisings began in southern Iraq, mainly in Shiite cities, while Kurdish rebellions ignited in the north. For many Iraqis, this felt like a rare chance to push back against years of fear. Saddam reacted immediately and brutally. He ordered elite units of Republican Guard and security forces to crush the uprisings at any cost. Cities like Najaf, Karbala, Nasiriyah, and Basra were surrounded and attacked with tanks, artillery, and mass arrests. Once control was reestablished, the regime focused on punishment. This punishment was not hidden. It was carried out in public spaces so that fear would spread faster than any rebellion ever could. Women became central targets during this period. Security forces accused women of supporting rebels by carrying messages, providing food, or simply being related to men who had joined the uprisings. Many of these accusations were based on suspicion alone. Women were arrested in broad daylight, often taken from the streets, markets, or their homes, while neighbors watched. Some were beaten publicly before being forced into vehicles. Others disappeared after arrest and were later found among mass graves uncovered years later. Executions also occurred without formal charges or trials. In several southern cities, women accused of aiding rebels were killed as examples. These acts were carried out in busy areas on purpose. Family punishment was a key tactic during the crackdown. Mothers of suspected rebels were detained to pressure their sons into surrendering. Wives were publicly humiliated to break the will of men still hiding or fighting. These actions were carefully planned. As the violence faded, another crisis quietly took hold. Iraq was placed under strict United Nations sanctions. These sanctions limited imports, cut oil revenues, and crippled the economy. Inflation skyrocketed. Salaries became nearly worthless. Food shortages were widespread. Many families survived on government ration cards that provided barely enough to eat. Women were often responsible for managing food, caring for children, and keeping households alive during this collapse. As daily life became harder, more women were forced into public spaces to find ways to survive. Some sold personal belongings. Others worked informal jobs or relied on aid. Instead of addressing the economic disaster, the regime shifted blame. It began framing social breakdown as a moral failure rather than a result of sanctions and war. Women were increasingly accused of dishonoring their families. These accusations gave the state a convenient target. By focusing on women's behavior, the government avoided responsibility for widespread poverty. Moral policing became a tool to control frustration and redirect anger away from the regime. Public punishment returned with force. In cities like Baghdad, Mosul, and Hila, women accused of moral crimes were arrested in markets, streets, and public transport areas. Some were beaten in front of crowds. Others were taken away by security forces and never returned. State-controlled media played a major role in supporting this system. Television and newspapers portrayed women accused of moral crimes as symbols of social decay. The coverage ignored hunger, unemployment, and sanctions. Instead, it suggested that women were responsible for the collapse of values. This narrative justified public punishment and encouraged society to accept it. In 1996, legal protections for women were weakened through amendments to the Iraqi Penal Code. These changes reduced punishment for men who killed female relatives under claims of honor. In some cases, killers faced only a short sentence. In others, they were not punished at all. This shift did not create honor killings in Iraq, but it removed the fear of consequences. Before these changes, such killings were illegal and could result in serious prison time. Afterward, the law signaled approval. Men learned that claiming dishonor was enough to avoid punishment. Courts rarely questioned these claims. Police often refused to investigate. The state had effectively stepped back and allowed violence to happen. Women became extremely vulnerable inside their own homes. A rumor, a dispute, or an accusation was enough to put a life at risk. There was no need for evidence. A woman could be accused of dishonoring her family simply for speaking to someone, refusing a marriage, or being seen outside without supervision. Many killings happened openly, in homes or courtyards, with neighbors fully aware. Authorities often did nothing, even when violence was reported. In 2000, Saddam took a more aggressive approach. He expanded the role of the Fedayeen Saddam, a paramilitary group created to protect the regime and enforce loyalty. The group was led by his son, Uday Hussein, and operated outside normal laws. Its members answered directly to the presidency and were known for extreme violence. During this period, the government launched a campaign against women accused of prostitution. Poverty, caused by sanctions, had pushed many women into desperate situations. Instead of addressing the economic crisis, the regime blamed women themselves. Public executions began appearing in several Iraqi cities, including Baghdad, Basra, and other urban centers. Women accused of prostitution were beheaded in busy areas, often near markets or major streets. These locations were chosen carefully. The goal was maximum visibility. Bodies were sometimes left exposed for hours to ensure the message was seen. Families were forced to collect the remains under supervision. This added another layer of humiliation and fear. The punishment did not end with death. It followed families back into their communities, marking them permanently. Human rights organizations later documented dozens of such executions between 2000 and 2001. The real number is believed to be much higher because many cases were never reported. These killings were not hidden. They were designed to shock the population into silence. By 2002, Iraq was under enormous strain. Years of international sanctions had already weakened the economy, destroyed services, and left everyday life difficult for most families. Hospitals lacked medicine, electricity was intermittent, and clean water was scarce. Many people depended on government rations just to eat. These conditions made ordinary life feel fragile. The state used this fragile situation to tighten political control even more. Instead of reducing pressure, the government expanded its system of arrests and punishment against anyone it suspected of disloyalty or dissent. This included women, even when their actions were not political, because the regime saw visible control of society as a way to prevent unrest. In 2002 and early 2003, official reports and human rights groups documented a pattern of politically motivated arrests, torture, and killings. The Iraqi judiciary was controlled by the regime, meaning courts could not act independently. This meant that if the intelligence services or security forces decided a woman was dangerous, that decision stood without fair review or evidence. These powers were used to target women accused of having contact with foreign organizations, relatives abroad, or even humanitarian workers. Any contact with the outside world was seen as a threat to the state's strict isolationist policies. Women who had studied overseas, spoken with foreigners, or even received mail from relatives abroad risked surveillance, detention, or questioning by security services. Public punishments continued during the final year of Saddam's rule. Security forces carried out arrests in crowded markets, bus stops, and public squares, so that the act of arrest itself became a warning. Extrajudicial killings and summary executions were still reported. and there was no independent mechanism to investigate or stop these abuses. The regime's oppression affected ordinary life in Iraq. Women who might once have felt safe in their communities learned to avoid public places and public speech. Behavior that might once have seemed normal, speaking about politics, questioning the government, or even showing concern about living conditions, became risky. People learned to self-censor because speaking out could lead to disappearance, imprisonment, or worse. Over time, society became conditioned to look away. Neighbors stopped asking questions when someone was taken. Families avoided discussing politics at home. Silence became a survival strategy because intervention could draw attention from security forces, which meant danger not just for an individual, but for an entire household. In April 2003, Baghdad fell as U.S.-led forces entered Iraq and Saddam's regime collapsed. Almost immediately, the security structures that had enforced decades of fear disintegrated. Intelligence offices were abandoned, and prisons were opened by families searching for missing relatives. In the chaos that followed, mass graves began to surface across the country. These graves contained the remains of people who had disappeared under Saddam's rule, including women who had been detained, punished, or executed without due process. The discovery of these graves revealed the scale and brutality of repression that had been largely hidden from the public eye. After April 9, 2003, women began to come forward with accounts of abuse, disappearance of family members, and years of living under a system that punished them not only for alleged acts, but also for supposed associations or beliefs. Many spoke about how easy it had become for security agents to enter neighborhoods and arrest women on suspicion alone. Today, researchers and rights organizations continue to document the long-term effects of this repression. They show that the fear and trauma women lived through did not vanish when the regime fell. Instead, it left deep psychological scars and a legacy of mistrust in society. The machinery of punishment had been so effective that silence remained a habit long after Saddam was gone.